So all I'm going to do is kind of run through where we're going with the AI at the moment. I'm hoping to work on this for like a couple more months, and then I'd actually like to get back to more of the level design side of stuff. But we're a stealth game, so having AI that can chase you, lose you, etc., is kind of really important. So for my own benefit and for anyone who's interested, I think it's probably worth running through kind of what we have and where it's going. So doing everything with behavior trees, because behavior trees are cool, and it's a massive time saver, to be honest, with the stuff Epic has provided for us. So I've got my handily named behavior tree here somewhere. So this is the old one, and it's kind of got a bit massive and complicated. So it would be nice to slim it down a tad, but I can run you through roughly how it works. Also kind of useful to have a look at the game. I'm so used to having multiple screens, so I'll have to get used to that. So let's move these guys out the way. We don't care about them for now. Goodbye. So if we imagine this is something that the AI is interested in, and this is our AI. Now the system I've got at the moment is it all works around suspicion. We have this service here that's constantly looking for things that are suspicious. And then basically we have options off here depending, it'll do something different depending on how suspicious it is of what it sees. This works pretty well. I don't need to go into this, it's not particularly exciting, that part. But the biggest weakness of this is that it puts a lot of weight on the AI itself and the suspicion service to actually decide what's important and what isn't. In this old system, basically, the AI looks at this object, the object doesn't do anything, and the AI goes, what exactly are you, and do I care about you? What I've got at the moment is it only cares about this thing here. It only cares about the player. It doesn't care about anything else. That's not really very flexible. It's not very flexible in terms of allowing other people on the team to add features. I have to do it. And also, you can't do cool things like, I don't know, an AI notices a door's open, or it notices a sound, or something like that. So what I've been doing is kind of throwing that all away. So the primary thing with this is that you have your suspicion. Your suspicion grows for something you look at that's interesting. And then basically I have these selectors here, and you're working through all the different combinations of, did I hear it? Did I see it? How suspicious am I? And then you have to do lots of sort of checks to, filter through. And how my new version works is totally different to that. I don't really care about suspicion. Suspicion will still be a thing, and eventually it'll be up here. But really, everything is now kind of based around this idea of having interest in the world. So everything is based around an interest source, which is actually what this thing is. So if I open this guy up, this is some debug stuff here, but the real meat of it is that there's a relationship between the AI and this object. So the object takes some of the weight for itself. The primary thing that it does at the moment, if I just see how this, if I remind myself how it works, which bit sees which first? Okay, yes, I remember. So this is why this is good, because it's forcing me to remember what the hell I'm doing. So in the AI character controller, I believe this is where it is. Let's have a look. Yes. Cool. Okay, this is how it works that's different. So this is primarily kind of my old thing. This is quite complicated, and you can see some of it is really quite scarily horrible. But anyway, the only bit we care about for now is how we're doing all the perception processing. So this stuff, not important for today's discussion, but primarily the thing we're worried about is we're hearing stuff. We're saying this is a hearing source. Now before, the reason this is so massive is that the AI is doing all the processing to decide what kind of thing it is and exactly how it should react to it. What I'm making this do now instead is, again, like lots of detail we don't need to worry about. What we need to worry about is this, is once this object is sensed, and that's the technical, actually using it in a technical sense here of how the perception system works. Once it's successfully sensed, instead of going, okay, now I will further process you, what it does instead is it fires off this function on the interest source, and it says, hey, I've discovered you. Now when it's been discovered, it says which stimulus it used to do that sensing, which we'll come back to later. But basically, it goes here and it says, okay, cool. Well, this is new. This is the first time we've interacted. In which case, I'm going to do two things, and I'm trying to remember which one I do first. So I think what I do first is I go, okay, well, I'm going to update the interest record, which is the equivalent of how I used to do it before. Instead of just the AI pulling all this stuff out of the world, this interest source goes, hey, here are the things that are interesting about me. Here's my priority. Here's what sense it was. Here's the type it is. We're not using the type yet, but that will come into different things, like if it's related to the player, if it's related to something else, another NPC, environmental only, that sort of thing. And also a literal link to the source object, because we might want to do stuff with that. We might not. And obviously I should point out that anytime, please do stop me to ask questions about it, and I hope I can remember why the hell I did a thing. So we do all the updating of the interest record. That's compared to what's kind of in the AI's brain. And when I say the interest record, all I'm talking about is just on the blackboard, the AI blackboard, there's a bunch of keys here which I've conveniently put new on while I figure out what the hell I'm doing. And these things make up the record of, like, hey, if I want to know what the current thing the AI is interested in, these values are going to hold it for me. So we do a bit of an exchange between the interest source and the AI. And also, I can't remember in which order we do this, but I'm sure, here we go. So that's it. Part of the discovery process is that the two interact with each other. And if this is the first time that this has happened, which is what you want, because you can only discover something once, if you discover it, the interest source itself adds you to this list, or rather an array. And then the crucial thing is, which takes this kind of to the next step, which is how I got her in the first place, is then what it's going to do is, if there's more than one AI that said, hey, I'm aware of this thing, and also I'm interested in it, it's going to go, okay, well, I'm going to assign roles to you. So if you pop through here. So at the moment, this is pretty basic, but it's got the potential to be expanded. The general gist is that what we do is we clear everything else that used to be in this map. And once the map is clear, we go, okay, well, from this interest source to the AI, give me the distances. And then once I have all the distances, that becomes the key for my map. I believe that's the way around I have it. Let me just check the old map. Yes, so the float value, the distance, becomes the key. I think this is the right way around. And then the other bit is the, I want to say, value. I don't use keys and maps a lot, excuse my ignorance. But why we do that is because we can then look them up quickly. We make a little thing for sorting them. Where is my cool little sorting thing? Here it is. So we make a little thing for sorting them. Again, this isn't the focus, so I won't bore you with it. But we basically go through, and if we want them smallest first or largest first, we just pick them out of one array using this min-afloat array or max-afloat array and stick them in another one. And then that gives you your big sorted list. Where was I? So then what we end up with is a list of values that are sorted by the distance from this source itself. And once we have that, we can go through all the AI that are involved and be like, for now, all I'm doing is saying, okay, who's closest? Right. Good news. You're the guy that goes to investigate the problem. So you walk over and actually do some searching. Are you a bit further away? Then even better news. I'm going to make you what I'm calling a group leader, which to all intents and purposes for us just means stand still, say something that makes you sound smart, like, hey, I think you should go look over there, but better written. And then basically just stay where you are. And then anyone else who's there, so this is my default pin, anyone else that's there, just say, hey, your role is bystander. And I imagine what that means for us is they kind of stand still, maybe move a little bit, just sort of look around. Now, some of you may have noticed that this is using a technique I like to call copying, because it's basically the way that Mark of the Ninja works. I really recommend having a look through the Game AI Pro books. I can't remember which one it is, but there's a section for Mark of the Ninja, and they kind of break down how their system works. This is my interpretation of it. It's very similar, but it sounds like the way they did senses was different, which probably made more sense for them. But as we've already got this existing system, I like the idea that the AI is responsible for all the sensing, it reports it back, but then the important thing is this interest source object is the one that assigns these roles. So rather than having something like I know, Dishonored or Crisis or something, where you have squads and teams and they make plans together and there's a constant oversight of a commander, whether it's a literal commander or sort of a, meta commander. We don't bother with that because I don't think we'll need it. So all that happens is we take in some variables from this interest source, we fire out the roles, and then we don't think about it again. That's it. Like, they're just independent. That's the hope anyway. So let me think. So that's kind of the idea, is that now we've got this interest source object, wherever it's gone. Let's just minimize this. This interest source object that eventually I should be able to attach to anything, or I can make them appear, I can make them disappear, whatever. And the AI will respond to them in the way we want, and we can configure them to do different things. And so going back to where we started, so this makes the tree quite different, because here everything is based on suspicion, and I've got lots of workarounds and things in this service and little weird branches of this tree that are working out the things that the interest source already knows. So even though this one has more functionality than the one I'm working on, the sort of core of it is the core of it is, yes, that's what I want. The core of it is much simpler and much more readable, I find. So rather than having loads of top level states, because a lot of them are kind of sort of hacked together stuff we needed for things that didn't occur, really I'm thinking for a normal AI, there's only kind of three things that are going on. The primary thing is that you have a target, and that's I'm trying to make it a very specific term. A target means, it probably means the player, but it means something that the AI is completely aware of, knows exactly what it is, and knows that it wants to attack it. So for those of you know how the sort of selectors and stuff work, so this is going to be the thing it tries first. You should always try and do this first. So that's if you have a target. And at the moment, I don't have that functionality in, and because you can't add comments in behavior trees yet, I just tend to stick wait notes in with different words written in them to remind me what to do. But this will be the pursuing thing. This will be the meat of it when it's player versus AI. And this is the interest source one, which we'll go through in a second. And finally, this will be kind of, so I don't have a target. I'm not interested in anything in the world. So hey, no problem. I can do what I want. Realistically, this probably means for us that there will be a patrol that they should be following. And I haven't yet decided the best way to handle this. Like, I'm not sure if the waypoint sort of is a smart object that will grab the player when it grab the AI when it notices that the AI isn't doing anything, or if the AI will elect to do that. But I think the waypoint should probably sort of take over control. That's the thing that's different to our current system, rather than the AI driving that. Again, it's the whole smart object concept. Like, it's basically putting some of the intelligence in the world, because it's having it in one big ball is kind of hard to work on, and having something like this is more flexible and lets other people try stuff out. Okay, so the main thing, this whole interest source business. So if I have an interest source, I can look through here and I can look at the roles. Now, something I spent ages trying to work out before, and I don't know why this didn't hit me immediately. This is something dumb I did. Is if we go back over here, I have these cases where I think actually, on reflection, the issue with this was that because it started as this simple 3-chain thing here, and all of the really important decorators are at the top. So this means that, like, basically things at the top here, like, level of suspicion and things like that, are really major concepts, and you could be all the way down the bottom of this tree doing something right down here, and if this changed, then the whole tree stops. And it also means that because of the way it was structured, that because you'd be yanked right back up to the top of the tree, it would mean that I'd have to have weird situations where I had to catch. I wouldn't know where you'd come from before when you were entering a new thing. So for example, you could be down any of these branches and then the suspicion could stop, and then you'd be transferred here, and they'd have to use weird setups like this to check if you had been previously seen or not, and if the AI was previously suspicious of you. So that's not ideal. I've kind of decided the better way to do that is that you put those kind of decorators much further down the tree, much deeper. So what you end up with is, for example, this is a good example. So before, how I used to do this would be like, okay, you're a group leader, so here's your group leader behavior. You just do this forever until something way up the top of the tree here tells you not to do it. And then when you land somewhere else in the tree, I'll just check if you were in here before. Instead, I don't need to do that. What I can do is say, okay, I've got my selector up here, but actually the decorators that are keeping you in or out of these particular areas are right down the bottom here. So I can have the situation where I go, hey, if you're going to start doing the group leader behavior, I can have an intro sequence that will play because this role is equal to that. And then it will move to this one. And then this here is an infinite loop. So it will stay here until something else changes. And the thing that will change again is that the group leader role will change. And when that changes, rather than being shot all the way up to the top here and having to check what's going on, instead, because I have this forced success in here, this fails, but then it's forced to succeed. And as this is a sequence, it goes on to the next one. So I can have my bespoke outro for each one. At the moment, again, these are all placeholders. They're all just weights with like what I want them to do written on, because I can probably salvage that from before. But it does kind of basically work already, which is a relief. Let me just try it on one screen. So we get one guy there. So if I put these guys, let's just move them far enough away so they're not going to be seen. This is my lovely little ugly test area that everyone but me hates. So the cool thing is as well, that I've tried to do all the time, and admittedly I got a bit weak with, is making sure that I run stuff in simulation mode. Because while there are some disadvantages, some debug doesn't show. In general, it's so much easier for clicking around. So if I just took this up, hopefully what happens is this guy will hear this thing. There you go, he hears it, and he walks over and investigates it. And the thing I forgot to mention actually, so he just loops that a few times until I can actually make it do something proper. But he'll investigate that, and then that ends up being in... so let's see. So that's another thing where the two objects are interacting, rather than just him interacting and then him handling, okay, I'm done with this object. What happens is he will interact with it, and he'll trigger this complete investigation event. And what that will do basically is the interest source goes, okay, anyone that was interested in this object, it's now investigated, so none of you care anymore. So we clear all the roles of anyone associated with it. We take all the AI out of this. We clear basically all the information from any of the AI that were in this array. And when that's done, you clear all the other stuff, and then you destroy the actor. So this means that everyone is left in a state where they go, I know that thing is no longer an issue, and because we've destroyed it, no one else will see it again. No other AI can ever pick up on it. This should work most of the time. The obvious example is probably the player's a bit trickier. I'm using actually in this setup, the player's probably going to be the last thing I want to tackle because I don't really know how that's going to work. But anyway, so we saw that, and we can check that's all working because we can run it in simulation mode. So if I just pause this, because you can actually click on this guy. You'll have to excuse me, I'm not used to doing this with just one screen. So how can I get this to fit? Dare I use the window snapping? Probably not. Let's see. If I hit play on that, but this guy's still selected. So if we pause it, so we can see that at the moment, because this invisible object hasn't made a noise, so we can actually see how this works, right? So it comes to first selector and it goes, do I have a target? No, I don't have a target. Okay. This says, I don't want you to have a target, so that passes. But then the second one is like, do you have an interest source? And you don't, so that doesn't happen. So this puts us into the no target, no interest, no problem thing, which I made. Later on, as I said, this you can assume this is where patrols would happen and stuff. So anyway, he's going to do nothing for a bit. But then, shortly, right, there we go. So Ah, there we go. Right, so I forget it jumps right in there. So if you look here, so now what's happened is it changed, right? So this was no longer true. So the decorator pulled us out of that sequence, and we go back up to the top of the selector, and this still isn't true, and this is the first one that is. So what we do is we have this little thing that I've set up where it just pops a little question mark up. It's just a little bit of useful UI so I can tell what's going on. And then we get into the meat of it. So from the AI's perspective, it doesn't decide its role, it's just given it. We go, okay, right, what role were you given? You were given the investigator role. So what happens? So as we said before, so this would be a little intro anim at the moment. It's just a little weight sat there. And there we actually move into the behavior itself, which at the moment is super simple. All we do is we move to the interest source, obviously, and I just loop this little searching animation. So I have a search, then wait, do that twice. And then the key thing in terms of mechanically this working is just this. And here we go. So we execute this thing, and what we do is we look at whatever the current interest source is that's set in the blackboard. So that's over here. Boop. So our current interest source is that one. So it's the only one that's in the world, obviously. But we go into that and we go, hey, I have completed investigating you. And once that's happened, as we said before, what happens is it goes, cool, well, clear everyone's roles and delete me. So that is what will happen very shortly. If I go back out here. So he's on his way over there. So he'll walk over and he'll do the little investigate there, as you can see. And then as soon as that finishes, which is very shortly, come on. There we go. So as soon as that finishes, we're back where we started because we no longer have an interest source because that gets removed. And we move back into no target, no interest, no problem. So that's cool. That works with one guy. But, you know, it should work with multiple ones now. So if I bring these other guys over, here you go. So again, having this in simulation mode is the best way to do it because while you have, I mean, I can show you actually because again, it's something that's not particularly well documented. So if I just load into the game, oh yeah, I always forget. Come on. Ooh. Okay, you're making me worry. Okay, so if we go into normal play, oops. Oh, go away. Did I have a little breakpoint there or something maybe? So the problem with this is, oh, that's interesting, is that there is debug here that you can turn on, but it's only going to pick the closest one. And yeah, it's just kind of not so manageable. It's useful for when you're focusing on what one is doing. The other thing you can notice here is obviously you can see all of our sense debug. So you've got the view cones, and the bigger ring there is hearing. So that's great for that, and it's, you know, it does have its uses, but it picks the nearest, and you can't select, and you can't use the mouse cursor. So when you're at this stage, especially when it's multiple, simulate all the way, because now I can click them, and if I load this back up here, I can see what each one is doing. So just a little bit more space. Come on. Right, so we can see that if I click on this guy, can I do that? There you go, click on this guy. Oh, that's interesting. Is he stuck further back? Oh, is it because it's paused maybe? I don't know. Anyway, so if you click on this guy, you see he's doing that role, and you click on this guy, come on, he's doing that role, and you click on that guy, and he was doing that role. So you can click between them, which is really quite useful. And actually, I mean, admittedly, in this instance, it's not useful, but you can actually move them in real time. And amusingly, I think if you do it with the player actually drops, don't they? Maybe they don't anymore. Oh well. So, got maybe another 15 minutes left. So I will cover some of my other big tasks I've got ahead of me. So as I said, the biggest thing with this, the thing that makes this all tick, that is kind of wrong now because it's very player focused, is this update suspicion service. This is kind of what drives everything, and it's been a little while since I've been in here, so we shall go on a journey together. Right. So mostly how this works is we're not even using the proper Unreal stuff here. We just say we set something as the enemy. Is it a class? Why is it? It's just an object reference. Right, so we can set an object as an enemy, and that's it. And basically, if it's not the enemy, we don't care. We don't do anything. And so you can already see how this is, it's not very generic, it's not very reusable, but that's how it works. We go, is this the enemy? If it's not, I don't care, in which case my suspicion value is dropping and dropping and dropping. But if it is, what we do is, again, this is the other problem with this, looking at it now, thinking about it. It's completely focused on sight as well, which makes sense because that's where we started, because immediately here it's going into saying, well, which view cone are you in? And as we said before, like, is there an easy way to show this? Yes, just move these guys away. And load up the game normally. Not in simulation mode. This way. And this. Like that. Right, so it's primarily focused on what those cones are up to, right? If you're on the closest one to him, the middle one, the furthest one away. Basically, the closer you are, the quicker suspicion goes up. And when it reaches certain values, that's when we do certain things. But this is bad because suspicion is like a general concept, but already we're filtering it by sight. And also it runs all the time, so this isn't great. But anyway, this is why we're here, because we're going to rewrite this later. So check we're visible in the cone. If we're visible in the cone, what we do is we basically, as I said, raise or lower it depending on which cone we're in. And then that basically this writes things back to the blackboard. This writes, let's have a look, if I recall. So there's like a suspicion level. Right, and this writes that suspicion level back to the blackboard. And what that does is determine the kind of response you get. So if you're a little bit suspicious of something, you stop, you take a quite closer look at it. If you're really suspicious of something, you chase after it. But again, I have to keep reminding myself, I'm saying something, but it's not. It's just the player. The problem with this is, as I said, it's very focused towards sight, because the way hearing works is a bit of a hack in that sound basically spikes a big chunk of suspicion and holds it in a very artificial manner. It's not really the correct way of doing it. And any other information has to be kind of worked out at the time. So for example, it's like so many of these branches of these selectors is deciding if there's a path to you, things like if it's a path to you, if I knew where you were before. So there's loads of branches. This is stuff that the interest source can figure out. And also, if I'm at some point, further down this branch, and I want to know how this was heard or other information about it, it's actually really hard to find out. So now I don't need any of this. I was nearly going to accidentally make a terrible pun and go, well, my suspicion is that this probably doesn't really need to exist anymore. And I just need to tidy up my terminology for it, because the hardest part of doing this, I found, actually is not really any of the coding or the creating of all these systems that go together. That kind of just works itself out. The bit that's tricky is coming up with very specific terminology and sticking to it, because you end up using words interchangeably that you can't. Like, for example, there's a difference between being interested in something, discovering something, and investigating something are all very different things. So what this used to be is these distinct levels used to be a generic, sort of very arbitrary level of interest in one object. Now I'm changing it to okay, well, the first level of this where I stop and take notice is probably discovery. Discovery is literally, I am aware that there's something. Don't know what it is, I'm just aware that it's there. And what follows that is you then investigate it. And once you investigate it, only when you complete an investigation do you know what it is. So if you think about it in terms of a light switch, not a light switch, like a torch or something, that's pretty clear, right? It's, oh my god, this level's got nothing in it. Oh well, imagine this was a torch, right? So if the AI is moving towards this and they see it, if it's from sight, they'll stop, they'll look. When they stop, that's discovery. When they actually get on top of it, like actually, admittedly, that's kind of what this does. Like imagine this is a light source. When they actually notice it, so this first bit here, that would be discovery. And now this was going to be investigation, right? So it's important that those are very distinct concepts because otherwise you get in a big mess. And trust me, I did. Now, once you have those working, you can see how you can change it for other senses. And when it doesn't rely on just sight, for example, you can be like, okay, well, this interest source, I can attach this to anything and I can create them at will and I can destroy them at will. So if we think of like other classic stealth examples, you can have something where it's like, if I leave a door open that an AI is aware was closed before, then you can spawn an interest thing on it. Or, I don't know, you pass past a NPC who tries to grab your attention and they make a noise. Same thing. So let me think what else is on my list of stuff to do. The other thing in here that's horrible is, so yeah, thinking about it. So the core problems are there's a lot of stuff dependent on sight, and there's a lot of situations where I'm still sort of unlearning, trying to do things like state machines, and I'm doing weird checks to decide where you were in the tree previously, which is not the way to do it. So I'm not doing that anymore. The other thing is as well, is I have this concept of last known position. I say I have this concept. It's a very well-known situation. So how this works at the moment is that it's all driven by the AI and all driven by the AI blackboard. There's lots of conditions here. I'm trying to think of where most places where it comes into. A lot of it is driven directly from the site, thinking about it. I'd have to check exactly where that lives now. Because it did get moved. Actually, okay, I remember where most of it is. So most of it is in this way too big, way too big AI character controller, and it's in the perception processing. So the two things you get from, well, actually, just go into this because this again is not very well known. So the important part, if you use the AI perception system, is you get this event. This is what you want. This is the good stuff. The on-target perception updated. When you get this, this happens when any of your sensors that you've got attached to your AI, which I can probably show you. Boop. Here we go. So you have a sensors config. So here you go. Hearing and seeing, various values in there. But the important thing is you just attach them as sensors, and there is some documentation for that. Anytime any of the states of these change between successfully sensed and not successfully sensed, this thing fires off and you get a bunch of information. So a lot of this is me storing variables in the way I want them, but the important thing is that you can start breaking out this. Where do I get it initially? Yes, so you get this stimulus structure, and this is, you can start breaking it out to get what you want. So you can find out what sense class it was. That's obviously very useful. So that's my first branch here, is I go, okay, well, did I hear it or did I see it? So in terms of this last known position concept, sight's a bit easier. So if we go to sight, we go, okay, did I successfully sense it? I.e., am I seeing this? Has it just entered my vision is the way to think about it. So if it has, we do a bunch of gross stuff I don't really want to get into, but long story short, it comes into your vision. We delete any concept of a last known position because I don't need to recall where I last saw you because I'm looking at you and it's live, right? That makes sense. But of course, you can successfully sensed can be false, and that means you have just left my vision. that is when I go, okay, well, place down this marker. And the marker is basically a snapshot of the player sprite at the last location they were seen, and we store some other data, so they know where that is and they can use that. Now, some of that should be in the behavior tree. Excuse me. Some of that should be in here. I mean, more accurately, it should be in the Blackboard because it's a resource they should be able to use. The problem is it's used very inconsistently, particularly around here. So you end up with situations where I've been using it to kind of smooth them out when they're chasing the player, because sometimes they'll disappear out the cones and lose sight of them, but you want them to still keep chasing. So you see here, like, rather than changing to the enemy I can see, I'm actually, even when I'm deciding to attack them, I am still using this last known position object that's following them around. So that's not right, and it's not consistent. So I feel like this is actually something that's probably going to be abstracted out of here completely and put into some of it. I think will get rolled back into the sensors themselves, and some of it I think will become part of the just part of the AI controller rather than living in here, because I shouldn't be sort of live manipulating it in the way that I am here, and it makes the tree very messy. Right. So I think my goal with that is, yeah, again, it shouldn't be in the behavior tree. We take it out of here. It worked, and I learned a lot, but we don't need this here. What else? Oh, hey. Hey, Chris, this is the first time I've seen an in-depth AI explanation that makes sense. Really cool to see a more detailed breakdown for a change. Yeah, well, thanks. It makes me feel like I've actually learned how some of this works. Documentation is a bit thin on the ground. It's definitely coming, and I ask about it, and people are quite helpful from Epic's side. But yeah, I felt like the examples I could find were quite simple. And as with all great game dev, I think it's just been a lot of trial and error to figure things out. So yes. What else is bad in this stuff that I'm going to throw away? So this kind of based on suspicion thing and having these two branches off my selector was fine. Something that is not fine is having this extra mode where I'm like, hey, if I've set this arbitrary flag, please just sort of stay in this holding pattern. Basically, this was our kind of catch-all. Oh, I want them to stay in a certain place, and you know, stuff like I want you to wait here, then move only if the player goes in this area. All that kind of scripted stuff that we don't want too much of, but particularly now is kind of necessary for demoing things, and a little bit is inevitable. So two things. One, a lot of the information this is storing, if we look, I can remember some in particular is bad. Right, there's a lot of storing of variables here. Like, see, we're storing starting positions and starting directions. So this is for when I had situations where I say, hey, wait here forever until a thing is triggered. But you know what? If you lose suspicion and you can drop back in here, go back to exactly where you're standing and the direction you're standing. This shouldn't really live in here. This is something that I feel is like the waypoint's responsibility, or your patrol route should have all this in. But again, it worked. So that's something the patrol route should own. And then from this perspective, all we should have is, it should be like my waypoints actually work, where basically, again, it's putting some of the intelligence back into the world where the AI doesn't decide, it doesn't read in where all the waypoints are and pick them or whatever. It uses EQS, which, that's for another day, but it uses EQS to pick the closest one. And then it uses it and says, hey, what's the next one? What shall I do? So that should be expanded to include things like that waypoint can easily remember the facing direction and that kind of stuff. So that should live in there, and it will. What else? Let's go back over here. And there's some other stuff in here. Right, yes. So the wider question of if you want to script them. When you're kind of forcing them to do things outside of this tree, and it gets messy and you end up with little weird branches. The cool thing is, if it pays off, is why it really appealed when I saw the way Mark of the Ninja does this, is that if the designers and myself ever want the AI to do some kind of quite bespoke behavior, it's totally cool to just throw an interest record like straight into its brain. So rather than going, rather than doing this the old school way and saying, "Hey, I'm going to give you this huge amount of information and tell you to stand exactly here and do exactly this at exactly this time," instead, it's kind of like some kind of suggestion thing where I just go, "Hey, suddenly you're really interested in this object," and it goes, "I am really interested in that object." But then the AI itself has the capability to then take on that role and do what it's supposed to do. So the other cool thing with that as well is that you can say, let's say, for example, I don't know, I am lifting their example again exactly, but this sounds so cool and so simple. Say, for example, you script the AI to open a door on the far side of a room, but the player comes into the room and turns off a light or breaks a torch or whatever. So the AI goes, okay, well, for no reason, I'm most interested in opening this door. But as it walks across, this broken lamp has a higher priority, so it stops and looks at that instead. So you have your scripting, but it's not that kind of rigid, horrible scripting where everyone's going to catch that in a video game where, the AI is just determined to do something completely to its own detriment. So that will be cool, and that will mean this whole chunk can just disappear into other places. What else don't I like about this? I do like a lot about this. I mean, I will say, in the last couple of minutes, I'll probably spend a bit of time on this because most of this, lots of trial and error, but kind of figured out nicely as we went along. But this section was by far the hardest. This is basically, I'm very suspicious. I'm pretty sure there's an enemy, and I'm going to try and attack it. To get this to all move between the states took a lot of goes. The main problem, the trickiest one, was literally close up on the player and attack them, which you'd think would be simple, right? It's like, you think it would just be two nodes, which if we ignore the rest of it, it would just be like, hey, move next to the enemy and just swing and attack them. It just doesn't work that way. So what we ended up having to do was, there's a lot of checks that go on all the time, lots of decorators, but the key thing that made it work was we actually use a simple parallel, which I'd never used before, because the problem is, if you have them go through their motion, so if they walk or run, they stop, and then they attack in that sequential order. The problem is, by the time they stop and start to swing, if they're chasing a player that's continuing to run, they'll swing and they'll miss. And this compounds the problem because they swing, they miss, and then while they're playing that animation, they're completely stationary, so the player gets even further away, and rinse repeat. We ended up with what the rest of the team referred to as sort of Benny Hill situation, where you could just run and they would just chase you swinging forever, and it looked pretty stupid. So the solution to that is using the simple parallel, because kind of does what it says on the tin. So we say, hey, continue moving, don't ever stop moving, but while you are moving, try and attack the enemy when you get close enough to them. And this was the other change. We don't just say, hey, walk next to them, then swing, because you're going to hit them. We actually have, I might be able to show it. Yes, here we go. Open these dudes. Open the full editor, please. Report. Yes. So we actually have this volume here. This is the, look, attack rangefinder. I believe the kill box is also the same. It is, right. So the deal is, oops, sorry, so used to multiple screens. Where was I? Over here somewhere. Yeah, so the deal is that this decorator we made to check the attack range is literally the volume it's going to check for collision when it kills whoever's in it. So in theory, I've still seen some situations where this doesn't happen and I can't quite think why, but in theory, it won't try and attack unless it knows it's going to hit you. And that fixes that up. That took quite a while to figure out, even though I realized it seemed simple, but every other way we tried it just either looked weird or made them very slow, just not lethal enough to do anything. But okay, so that was that. That was a tricky one. And then these are more straightforward, but it's blending into those situations where you think, okay, I've seen you, but now I've lost you in some reason. So I believe, what is this one? I think this is if you can see them, but you can't. You can see them, you can get close, but you can't actually like do anything else. And this is the other variant of that. This is the one that makes me the saddest, because this is the situation I've identified, but it's kind of later down the line to actually fix. So this is when I can see the enemy. I know I can't reach them. I don't know what to do. Interestingly, this is what a lot of games like I've seen, because I always try it now in games to see what happens. Dishonored is a good example. I think this is what they did in Thief as well. I'm sure people correct me, but if they end up in this situation, they throw rocks at you. They're basically going, oh, I can't do anything, but if I don't do something, I'm going to look really stupid. And unfortunately, our guys look really stupid at the moment. So the solution to that is going to be working out how to do. Sorry, excuse me 1 second. It's going to be working out how to do. I forget what they're called, but basically having the AI being able to jump, like using a nav mesh to do it, and figuring out when they can make jumps. That will help a lot. And then capturing any other situation where they're able to do something else, call for help, something like that. I don't know. It's an annoying situation to have, but at least I can trap it, so I know when it's going to happen. And what is this one? So this is, yes, okay. So this is the kind of part of the classic stealth setup, right? Where they chase you, they've been chasing you for a while, they're almost on top of you, but then you lose them. So what do? Well, they blend into this situation where they'll run towards the last place they saw you. And then what they will do is, so yeah, this is all this manipulation of the last known position that shouldn't be here, but they store where that is. Oops, sorry. They store where that is, and then they slow down, and then they conduct a basic search. So this is, you know, a good example of just a simple, like, human-sounding way of doing a thing, right? So you wait a bit, you play your search and animations, you use EQS. I'll pick that up another time, but EQS is lovely. You use EQS to find somewhere nearby that you can navigate to. Crucially, it's somewhere near to the closest you can get to the thing you're investigating. So say like if you're a player and you jump off a ledge, the last place is the edge of that ledge. And then it'll go, okay, first point is a ledge, next point, boop, somewhere near the ledge. So you use that, you rotate, you move towards it, you wait, you play the search animation, and then basically rinse, repeat. We have another little catch here, which I'll be happy to get rid of, where we're just saying, hey, did you hear this? Because if you heard this, then don't... right, okay, this is part of it, but in this situation, it's saying, hey, you can remove that key now because you reached it. You reached the thing you heard. Sorry, to come around that the correct way. What that's all about is that if you think in a normal situation, if you see something, and then you lose it, gradually your suspicion decreases. So you're like, I'm getting less and less interested in that object, and you know what, eventually, I give up. With hearing, as I was applying that the same way, you'd have this weird situation where they'd hear something that's clearly quite important. They'd start walking over to it, and before they even got there, they'd be bored and walk back. Maybe for the exceptionally lazy guards, that makes sense, but not for the normal ones. So if we go back here, that's the main one, I think. But anyway, it's almost time for the actual proper Unreal stream and everything. So I made it. This was unplanned. I just wanted to see how it would go and, you know, sort of see what would come up. I intend to do these at least once a week, hopefully twice a week. Primarily focus on the AI stuff. I will try and balance it out with less staring endlessly at behavior trees, but in all seriousness, it's my world at the moment, and I'm also aware there's very little documentation, so I'm kind of making a thing that will be useful for me. So yeah, please let me know if there's anything you want, anything else you'd like to know about. Yeah, we have all those internet things, which I should totally learn how to do, but thank you very much. And hey, you will see more streams. So yeah, God, wait, you need to know those things where you have like a sign off and everything, but instead I'm just going to trail off and say nothing until the end. Bye!